All right, I will now call this Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting for May 24th, 2018 to order. First on the list is public comment. Anything unrelated to the case that we're going to hear tonight? Okay, hearing none, I will move on to appointment of new alternates. Chris Jacobs has volunteered to be an alternate for our board.
I make a motion to.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Any discussion on the motion?
That yes, you have not. Andy is an alternate.
Well, he is an alternate. That is correct.
Steve is the seated board member until he steps.
And Brian, no, actually, Brian is not here. So Brian's not here. We will say that I've asked you to step up. Would you like to make the motions again?
Well, actually, Steve can stay.
Who made the motion?
I made the motion.
Yes, correct. Steve can stay on for this.
Right.
To get us to a full quorum. Since
Correct.
Brian is not here, I'm asking Andy to come sit as a member tonight. Now, if we can have that motion for...
I will make the motion for Chris Jacobs to become an alternate on the Zoning Board of Appeals adjustments.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second. Steve second.
Okay. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Put your hand down, Chris.
Okay, so sign away, guys.
Now we will send him off to go get sworn in a moment.
Yep.
Now we can have this situation.
Does Chris always start meetings at 6? Good man.
Did I get to this one just for you?
I'm black. You're blue.
Here's the ones I stole from Suzanne.
Ball pen.
I paid my license to the dogs. Okay. Sure, what? Dana? Did you get the dust off?
No. Still a little dusty. Guess he doesn't use it for the rec meetings.
We could. Why don't we move to discussion and approval of minutes while we're waiting? Any discussion on those minutes? Any corrections? I didn't personally have any.
That on page 3, it
Yeah, you come sit.
on the sense is that a new application from the applicant might make most sense, and there are small changes of punctuation, capitalization that could be made, but it's not necessary. The one I would do is begins L. Brown thinks that the tide was running out on the original application, period. Capital H, his own interest is courtesy, timeliness, and good fact, and wants an application that focuses on plural, on the parcel and the effects on the community, period. The rest can go as it is, and I will give that by hand to
Make a motion
Dana.
to accept the minutes with changes.
I'll second it.
Any comment on the motion? All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Okay, so at this juncture, Steve, I need to ask you to step down. And Chris, I'll ask you to step up and sit in Steve's
And Andy's
stead.
sitting in for Brian.
Does anyone, what's that?
Andy's going to sit in for Brian.
Correct, Andy's still sitting in for Brian, correct. Yeah.
It was up to now, he was sitting in for Steve, that's why I wanted to.
No, he wasn't.
Last meeting.
Yes, correct. All right. I think you'll need this, but I'll take one of those plans.
Something else.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right, next on our agenda tonight is public hearing for an amended special exception application as part of the rehearing of the special exception request from Article 3, Section 3.5 of the Milton zoning ordinance, Table of Principal Uses, C, Campgrounds. Application requesting the expansion of Mighty Joe Campground submitted by Three Ponds Resort LLC, owner Daniel Flores, SFC Engineering. Partnership applicant, sorry. The property is located at 111 Mighty Joe Road, Milton, New Hampshire, tax map 28, lot 4, in a low-density residential zone. All right, folks, would you like to, yes?
Sorry, point of order, Mr. Chairman. I need to say it for the record, just say for appeal. Chris Bolt, Donahue Tucker Chandela, for a number of the abutters. We believe, as a point of order, there is a procedural error by you going forward with the notice that you've just read, saying it is part of a prior request for rehearing, when in essence you have a new application in front of you, a new plan that has not yet had the Fisher v. Dover analysis of is there a substantial change from the prior sets that you have voted down or not found that they meet the necessary criteria under your zoning ordinance. So I need to preserve that for the record, just so as if we're going forward tonight, I'm not losing that right on appeal. You can decide that you need to have that Fisher v. Dover analysis, that there was a substantial change from the overall plan to allow a new application for the same deal to come forward before you. That becomes then an issue on appeal up to the Superior Court.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, do you have any legal insight on that we as a board should be considering?
I may, Mr. Chairman, but I suggest that you give Mr. Malia an opportunity to respond.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Malia?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, Attorney Bolt has said what he needed to say to just preserve the record. I don't think there's any need for you to respond to his comments. He's just preserving the record in case he has to appeal this decision. You discussed this issue at great length at your last hearing. You approved a motion to allow us to amend the application, so this is ground that you've already covered. He's done what he needs to do by preserving his issue, and we should just be moving forward with the amended application this evening and apply the amended application to the 5 special exception criteria.
Thank you.
And I basically agree. I don't believe Fisher v. Dover would come into play unless the board had made a final decision and had completed the process earlier, but instead the request to amend was made and granted by this board.
Okay, thank you. All right. Does the board have any input or thoughts on that?
Whereas town council is advised that he feels we should basically proceed forward, that's what I think we should do.
All right. Then, that being the case, who would like to present for us what your amended application is?
I'm going to have George Fredette from SFC Engineering present the amended application. Before I do so, however, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to raise a conflict of interest issue or concern that we have. Like every applicant, we're entitled to an unbiased, impartial 5-member board. We want to make sure we have one tonight. As the meetings have gone on and the months have passed, we've become increasingly concerned that perhaps board member Larry Brown might be biased against the project, and we wanted to just make sure that he isn't, and have him state for the record that he is impartial, he's unbiased, he can apply the application to the 5-part special exception criteria, or if he is biased and feels like he's prejudged the application, then ask him to step down and appoint an alternate.
Okay. Do you have a
The,
comment, response to that?
The decision to recuse oneself is to the applicant. I believe that I continue to follow my oath of office. I have no bias for this application. I would parenthetically note my comments.
Louder.
I would parenthetically note my comments on page 3, that my interest is courtesy, timeliness, and good fact.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
That I will introduce the team that we have assembled tonight. I'm Peter Melia. I represent the campground, Mighty Joe Campground, Northgate Resorts, and Three Pond Resorts. To my left is James Bossenbrook, owner of the campground. His son Zachary has been at a couple of prior meetings. To his left is George Fredette from SFC Engineering, pinch hitting for Dan Flores tonight. Unfortunately, Dan had a death in his family, and the wake is this evening. So George is here for Dan. Dan Dumais from MDM Traffic Engineers is here. George White, campground manager, is here right behind me. So we have, I think, the ability, hopefully, to answer all of your questions tonight. And at this point, I'll ask George to present the amended application and how it relates to the 5-part special exception criteria.
Great, thank you. And just, I'm sorry, just so I can be clear of how this process goes, I'll say it, I've said it before. As we, you'll give me first an overview, then we will look at each criteria individually. We will take a straw, non-binding vote on each of the criteria after the discussions and the public input on each criteria, so that when this is all said and done, everyone kind of knows where this board was at on each of those criteria and why. And then at the very end, we will make a binding vote on the project as a whole. Sorry to interrupt you. Now you may proceed, please.
As Peter said, my name is George Fredette. I'm with SFC Engineering Partnership and pinch hitting for Dan tonight. The presentation of the arguments that I'm going to have tonight are not much different than the arguments that you've heard over 7 meetings since September. At the last meeting, however, we did agree that we prepare an amended application, and that's in front of you and up here. And in a few minutes, I'm going to point out that overview that you talked about, Mr. Chairman, and show you how this is different. But underlying this, our request remains the same. We're asking for a special permit for an allowed use. Understandably, all the deliberations over the course of the 7 meetings has not been so much about the proposed use as much as they have been about the intensity of that use or the density. And you're in the position of making that judgment. Quoting from the ordinance, the special exception shall be made in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. I think that we all need a perspective or a standard by which to go by. When we put these plans together, understand that we're using the Milton zoning ordinance. The Milton zoning ordinance has no declaration of requirements for number of sites allowed. If we use a standard from a nearby campground, on 79 acres they have 350 sites. By the way, tonight we're proposing to 318. If we go to the state is looking at how much capacity the land and the soil have to accept sewage. According to DES standards, the 318 sites here can be accommodated, or the sewage from them can be accommodated on 15 acres of land. This represents 225 acres. So both of those are standards that are way beyond what we're proposing here. In your local ordinance, you do have a provision for manufactured housing, also allowed in the low-density residential district with a special exception. If we use that criteria says you need a half an acre of land for every acre of dry land out here. The sites have to be half-acre sites. Well, we ran through that exercise, and assuming that as much as 2 miles of road was needed to network within there, there was enough land left over that a mobile home or manufactured housing park here would have 350 year-round units on it. So now I'm getting into a perspective here, starting with no limit down to 350. The standard that we're meeting tonight is actually a standard that was proposed to us by Attorney Bolt in a February email. And I'm very happy to report.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I must object to any settlement negotiation comments being brought into bear here. Those settlement negotiations had many factors involved, and I think it is patently inappropriate. That cannot come into evidence in a courtroom, and it should not come into any discussion up, down, through, or sideways. What either party said or might have said trying to settle up this case beforehand. I think he's referring to some email correspondence I have had with Attorney Malya, is what he's just said. The only thing that would be a suggestion of is some negotiations on settlement that was unfruitful because we had a number of other issues involved. It's not appropriate to blame it on me that we're just doing what Attorney Bolt said.
No, and I get that perspective. I guess the part that's confusing me is where board is the one that needs to make that determination, how settlement's happening between two lawyers from opposite sides to go around this board. That's my, but I guess I'd say keep it out of this discussion and we won't make it part of it.
Thank you, sir.
Please continue.
We are asking for a special exception to Article 3, Section 3.5 for the use. The existing campground sits on 225 acres, but only 45 acres of that you see about here is occupied with campsites. There's 223 campsites in that area. What we're proposing is to add 95 campsites to that. That is 78 campsites less than a proposal that we had initially. And just looking at this, there was previously East Area 1, East Area 2. We've removed East Area 2. East Area 1 has been reduced to 40 RV sites. On the plan that you're looking at, it does show 29 future sites. That's not part of this proposal. We ask that you're not considering the 29 future, just 40 RV sites in East Area 1.
So, I'm sorry, where are the 29 on that map at the bottom?
They're along the bottom row there. You may see them on that. To service this area, there's a disposal system being planned just south of East Area 1. There's a bathhouse in that area. And we'll be using the existing wells for the water system. There may be some upgrades, but we're planning on using the existing wells, and that'll be extended over to service the east area. West area has 35 RV sites, again with three-way hookups. And West Area 2 has 20 tent sites with water and electric only. There are 2 disposal system areas in this area that we've identified that would be part of the design as we move forward. Of course, over here, we also include in that west area a bathhouse, where again we're extending the water system there. And we have nearby parking in this area right here that would accommodate the campers, especially the ones using the tent sites. There's an amenities area. The amenities area, right about in the middle of the project, includes a water playground, a pavilion, a snack bar, maybe a mini golf. It's intended for campers only. Camping is a family activity. The kids are looking for something to do and something in addition to going to the beach for the day. They can be entertained with this amenities area. There's a new check-in area right over here. That check-in area is about 1,000 feet off of Townhouse Road. That 1,000 feet accommodates a long queuing area so that we can get the traffic off of Townhouse Road for any campers that on a Friday afternoon may be lining up to check in. But the check-in area itself is aligned with queuing stalls there so that they can be efficiently checked in. And lastly, right in the middle of that plan, you see what we call an expanded maintenance area. And the biggest feature in that is additional parking area for guests, for trailers, for boats. Just like the last plan, there's no construction that's being proposed within a 50-foot wetland buffer. There's no construction being proposed within a floodplain. All the sites are intended to be treed sites. There's 200 sites here. And you can see that there's a campground in there. That's the intention. That's what this is going to look like. And here, and here. They're treed sites. It's not being clear cut. People are camping in New Hampshire. They want trees. So any perception that there's clear cutting is just false. There's a significant buffer along Lyman Road. 500 feet of buffer between the closest campsite and Lyman Road. The nearest house to any campsite that's being proposed with this is over 300 feet. It's right here. The nearest parking area is over 500 feet to any home. The use we're asking for is camping, an expansion of camping. That's an overview of the features of the plan that was amended and being presented to you tonight. As I said, you're not going to, there's a few facts in addition, but there's not a lot of difference between the arguments that you heard before and the arguments that you're going to hear tonight. And Mr. Chairman, with your direction, I proceed.
Okay. Does the board have any questions before we start into the criteria?
Yes, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name already.
I don't have the name tag in front of me. My name is George Fredette.
Fredette.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the question of amenities.
Yep.
I'm sure on a corporate basis you have a sense of where you wish those amenities to be and what their scope is. Is there any indication on this plan of what they are?
On the plan? No. On the plan we show the location
or in the narrative itself.
As I just described to you, we have an amenities area right about in the middle of the camping area. And the things that are being considered in that amenities area are a pavilion, a mini golf, a water playground, a snack bar. There'll be a bathhouse there.
Yes. That.
Okay. And it's pointed out to me that in the project narrative that was submitted along with the application, it's on at the top of page 2 in the narrative. That outlines what I just said.
Anything else?
A question of the chair. Would you know from your reading of the zoning regulations?
Louder.
Would you know if from the reading of your zoning regulations for the town, if we have a provision for an RV park?
I can't answer that right now, so no, I don't have an answer to that. We can bring that up later, I suppose. All right, anyone else on the board? Chris, did you have something?
Mr. Fredette, can you expand upon the effluent disposal areas? I know you mentioned that, all the effluent could be treated at something like 15 acres or something like that. I noticed a vast number of effluent disposal areas. How are you going to get the effluent from the RVs to the, can you just elaborate on that?
SOC has probably worked on more campgrounds than, I'm going to say, any other engineering firm in New Hampshire. We've done a lot of this.
Just to give you a background, you did the work up on Albany on campground Pine Knoll. And I sent you reams of information probably 2-3 years ago. So I'm kind of familiar. Yeah, with the campground.
Thank you. The disposal areas that we're talking about are in this area here. That's the end of the system where the water is discharged to the ground, a leaching field just like we have in our backyards. Yeah, there'll be a collection system through the road system, so that each one of the campsites, each one of the RV campsites, not the tents, it will have a sewer hookup. For them, it's a pipe in the ground. Underneath is all the pipe works. I would anticipate that there would be some pumping systems in here. For instance, here we'll pick a low point, bring everything to that, and then pump to the field. If I remember the preliminary numbers that we have, there's about 20,000 gallons of sewage going in the whole thing. And so it would be divided amongst those. And of course, those systems, those fields are all approved by DES. Would be approved by DES. They haven't.
Right, 20,000 a day is what you.
I'm sorry?
Say 20,000, is that gallons per day?
I believe that's the number, yeah.
Is this intended to be a year-round community?
No, sir.
How does that get controlled? How does it not become a year-round community?
I wouldn't want it.
We own a number of parks in the northern part of the country. None of them are open year-round. It would not make economic sense for us to keep them open past maybe Halloween, maybe the first week of November, or something like that.
So is that something that, is that limitation or that, as you can see, some of the questions with respect to RV, and I did look at some of the past information was sent to me and enlightened me about Mighty Joe Campground. I've only been here 23, 24 years, but I've only been in the campground probably less than a handful of times. Baseball games mostly. So is it going to be part of the, if you will, your operational standard or your plan, in other words, that you commit to in writing that you're not going to be open after, let's say, October 15th or whatever date you pick?
This is a demonstration of Wirecast. We open. You want to know the time we open and we close?
Well, what I'm indirectly asking you is that, if you ask for a special exception and you're granted one for these number of even 10 RVs, that then, could those be 10, if this decides to go to an adult community, I'm 58, can I move in on one of these RVs, one of those towable ones, park it there, and then establish this as my primary residence in the future?
We don't allow park models in the campground, first of all. We only allow travel trailers or fifth wheels, and they can only exceed 40 feet.
Okay.
That's from the hitch to the bumper.
What?
No, folks, we're not in public session yet.
We
We'll answer
have
questions.
park models that we rent that are our bungalows. That's all we allow. We do not allow our campers to come in with park models. So if you walk through our campground, you will not see park models as my seasonals.
So as part of the stipulation, if this board were to grant an approval, would those be the conditions that you would offer up and that we would live with or make part of this, any approval?
Yes.
Okay.
Out of the rule now, so we haven't, it's been changed in 25 years, so.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, the house I live in, and it's not a shack, is less expensive than some of these fifth wheelers or large RVs I see on the road. Went to the camping show probably 5 years ago, and my wife thought that the kitchen setup was better than what we had in our own kitchen. I haven't taken her to another RV show since then. Strange reason. So these are some of my questions that, and I can honestly say I have not discussed, for the record, this case with anybody outside, either who's currently in this room, nobody. I'm the town moderator, so I understand more than others maintaining the sanctity or the clarity of this process. So that's why I'm asking these questions now. I didn't see them answered before in some of the readings, but I think they're fair and legitimate questions. I'm also wondering, so this is going to have to be at 20,000 gallons a day. This is a large water withdrawal system. It's obviously a community system. What are the operational parameters for this community water system? Meaning, who's the certified operator? Who does the quarterly testing? Who does the...
I do all the testing,
okay.
all the water testing.
So you're a certified water system operator?
We do all our own testing. We have sent it every month. We have a test every month. Yes.
Okay. All right.
I do the startups, I do the shutdowns.
Okay, fine. I did read with some interest the discussion about, Townhouse Road and the traffic on there, and
So Chris, actually, I think I'll have you hold for now on that. We'll get into that with that criteria.
So this is a technical question.
Okay, I'll let you go with that at this point.
You talked about, Mr. Fredette presented that you put the new check-in area so that you have adequate stacking on as people are checking in and/or adequate stacking as they're checking out. Turnover day, I typically call it. Camping I did. My concern is not so much on Townhouse Road itself, but on the intersection of Townhouse Road and Route 125. It's not what I would call the most well-designed or well-thought-out intersection. Certainly not in present terms, given the vehicles, the size of the vehicles, the power of the vehicles we have on the road. Understand that townhouse was built in 1802 when this community ceded itself from through the act of the legislature from Rochester. So that building was built there, and it would probably served great in the cart and buggy era. I don't think it's going to serve us well in that location going to the future. Have thought that for a long time, only from having done surveys in that area. When people certainly in RVs and or even dump trucks, when they make that right-hand turn heading northbound on 125, they literally gun it. And there's a number of driveways there that would conflict there. If had my druthers, none of the driveways would be there, but they exist. So from a design perspective, a technical perspective, that is a problem. Also, I'm not sure how, if people were leaving on the Saturday night, Sunday morning, whenever the turnover day is, and you had 2 or 3 trailers stuck there. And when I say stuck there, if there's an issue up on the Spalding Turnpike, we all see a marked increase in traffic through the downtown area. They get off at 17, they get off at 18, and they're trying to cut minutes off their travel time to get home. So a lot of times there's people literally barreling down off of Plummer's Ridge. and there's little, how do I describe it? It's not that there's adequate sight distance, but there's not adequate stopping sight distance when you consider the size of the vehicles going out to merge into the traffic and those coming down the hill behind them. So haven't seen, and maybe you can enlighten me, is there been any analysis, thought to look at that intersection, given the number of what I call new homes for the summer season? They are new homes that will be at this intersection. If this were a single lot residential subdivision, I'd be asking you where that traffic analysis is for that intersection. And so I pose the question to you.
Yes, and you're going to hear from Dan about that. Or unless you want to hear from him.
No, I think, why don't we put that into criteria 3 for what he answers in response to that, to come with that. I think if there's no objection, I'm going to move forward to the first criteria.
I still have a question. I did read page 2, which is why I had the question regarding the size, type, qualities of the amenities under discussion. And they are just mentioned amenity, like saying, King Kong is a gorilla. A small question. This application says there are 3 cabins. Is that still the current number of cabins? My impression from comments coming from the public.
200 sites and 3 cabins. Or is it 3 cabins or 3 homes?
3 cabins, rustic cabins.
And they're there?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
They are there, 3 cabins. Existing cabins have been there for...
And no permits have been pulled? No new bungalows have been put in?
Talked to the previous, no, the cabins are down on foundations. The bungalows are on wheels. So I'm confused on your question.
Okay. Then, of the 3 cabins that are...
The 3 cabins that are there, we pay taxes on because they're down on, they've been there. They're on
Then,
blocks.
I'm sorry, may I? So they are a meals and rooms use facility?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, fine. Thank you. I misunderstood the wheel and the non-wheel. Thank you for your help.
Okay. All right, criteria number 1. That the specific site is an appropriate location for the proposed use or structure. I'd like to answer that.
We believe that the specific site is an appropriate location for the proposed use or structure because, number 1, it's an expansion of the existing use. It's the same use on this 225 acres, and it's being done without degradation of the area. We've gone through 7 meetings with you to learn what the source of the issues are. And we think by cutting back with this application that this expansion is being proposed to without degradation of the area. It's an appropriate location because it's permitted by a special exception. It's permitted by a special exception in this zoning district. So we're not looking for variances. It's something that's in your zoning ordinance. As I demonstrated to you in my introduction, there's ample acreage here for the development of the campsites by whatever standard you want to pick. Whether it's at the state level, at the local level, we are meeting those standards easily. And of course, there's easy access to a major highway, local suppliers, restaurants, and it's appropriate use for a campground because it's on a lake.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, that concludes my presentation on number 1.
Thank you. I'll open for public comment. Before I do, I'm going to ask that folks, if possible, speak once to this criteria and not multiple times so that maybe we're not here till midnight. I'm going to ask for not too much duplication. If someone covers the topic, I'm going to ask you not to 20 other people come up and say the exact same thing. Okay. Yes, ma'am. And please state your name for the minutes and your address.
Judy Boucher, 220 Townhouse Road. While researching this whole process, in order to find what needs approvals and what does not, I found the following, which helped me understand how to proceed. In the document, The Basic Functions of the New Hampshire Zoning Board of Adjustment, from nh.gov, quote, "The terrible vagueness of applications is all too common in New Hampshire," end quote. Geis versus Barrasso shows a Supreme Court case where the special exception was vague, but granted by the ZBA. The ZBA's decision was also vague. The scope of the use mushroomed into something much larger than anticipated. The court disposed of the case because the application and the ZBA's decision was not detailed enough, and therefore, in the court's opinion, did not violate the special exception. It was too late to do it again. From the same document, quote, "Always ask the question, what if everybody felt free to do this under similar circumstances? Would it still preserve the integrity of the ordinance?" End quote. And, quote, "A word can mean different things in different ordinances. The trick is to look at your ordinance. If there is a definition there, use it. Otherwise, the relevant question is, what did the drafters and voters think they meant? Use the whole ordinance for clues." End quote. Our zoning ordinances were created from Milton's master plan, a document created by the planning board using input from the community, including discussions and surveys regarding the vision of what they want Milton to be. The 89-page master plan consistently describes the quality of life and how important it is to protect the natural resources in our community. It speaks frequently of recreation as natural, physical outdoor activities such as hiking, mountain biking, horseback riding, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, swimming, fishing, and other lake-related activities. This reference regarding recreation, I am 100% convinced, was expected when camping ground was defined in Milton's zoning ordinance. Camping ground is defined in our ordinance is, quote, "A plot of ground upon which 2 or more campsites are located, established or maintained, for occupancy by camping units of the general public as temporary living quarters for recreation, education, or vacation purposes." According to an article in Woodall's Campground Management in December of 2017, just 5 months ago, Northgate Resorts will be adding new amenities to all of its parks in 2018. Yet in paragraph 8 of the Three Ponds Resort project narrative sitting in front of us, vague phrases are proposed. In additions to pools, they are proposing, quote, "water and other attractions," end quote. Based on attractions at Northgate's other resorts, it is clear the intent is to produce a water park. Would everyone in the low-density residential zone be allowed to have water and other attractions approved? Some people think water parks are expected at campgrounds today in today's society. The spirit of our ordinance, however, is not about what current-day campers may want or expect. It is about our special exception with a zoning ordinance created by our town fathers in response to our community's desire within the master plan. The master plan states that natural resources and vintage recreational experience is what is intended, desired, and expected, not water parks or theme parks. If a theme park or water park was desired in our community, it would be accommodated for in our master plan and our zoning ordinances by creating a commercial resort zone, such as has been done in Guilford, Campton, Laconia, or Meriden. Directly from the State New Hampshire Zoning Handbook, quote, "Unless a particular use for which an application is submitted is stated in the ordinance as being explicitly allowed by special exception, the Board of Adjustment is powerless to grant a special exception for that use," end quote. So I ask, is Disney World or a world-class resort explicitly allowed with special exception in Milton? The reason I ask is to show you how dangerous a vague statement such as water and other attractions may be. In an article dated December 22nd, 2016, in Woodall's Campground Management, Mr. Zach Bosenbrook was interviewed and shared these comments regarding Northgate Resorts. Quote, We are competing with places like Disney World. That's how we see it, end quote. And they are, quote, intent on delivering a vacation experience that rivals world-class resorts, end quote. In a different article dated June 1st, 2015 in AroundThePanhandle.com regarding the Hagerstown, Maryland resort, Greta Bosenbrook, Director of Operations of North Bay Resorts, is quoted, "We are a water park. It is more like a Disney World destination," end quote. Is the 225 acres off Townhouse Road an appropriate site for a proposed use that competes with Disney World? The application states the intent to use 1 acre for amenities now, also known as attractions according to a Jellystone vice president, and 2 acres for a later date. However, there will be approximately 150 acres left undeveloped. With all Northgate properties adding attractions in 2018, and as said by Mr. Fredette, proposals will probably not stop. Once any portion of this proposal is approved, precedence has been set for the future. What will future proposals look like? I can't say. But did you know that Magic Kingdom and Disney World is built on only 107 acres? Disneyland in California is on 85 acres. Canopy Lake Park is on 72 acres. And Water Country in Portsmouth is on 26 acres. Another article in Woodall's on March 27th, the exact time North Bay Resorts purchased Mighty Joe, Mr. Bosenbrook is noted as saying that nearly every one of his company's resorts has some sort of water feature, and the ones that don't will soon have them. Apparently, he was sure enough that he will gain approval here in Milton. Would everyone in a low-density residential zone be approved for water features, in addition to pools, while still keeping the integrity of the low-density residential zone? Yet another parallel to Disney to show intent for proposed use is a strategy called theming. Theming is noted on the JellystoneFranchise.com website. You see, Disney has a mouse. Jellystone Resorts has Yogi Bear and Friends. Why is this important? First, as recently as December 2017, Mr. Bosenbrook stated in a Woodall's Campground Management article that the first acquisition their company made was a Jellystone park, and they tried to emulate this model at their other resorts. Second, just last month, Mr. Bosenbrook stated in an amusement RC article, the ultimate amusement industry resource site, that the Yogi brand is working for us. And third, the Jellystone park owners have been quoted in articles stating that they could not believe the increase in revenue from theming. RV Pro headline from April 12, 2017, quote, "Jellystone Park expands into a theme park mecca," end quote, referring to Northgate's Kerrville, Texas park. From the Jellystone franchise website, quote, "Just think of how thrilling it is for a child to meet Yogi Bear, to see a 10-foot statue of him waving, or to get his picture taken holding hands with Boo. It's exciting for parents too. There is an abundance of opportunities for signage and statues to theme your park. And every event becomes extra special when a costumed character arrives on the scene," end quote. This is consistent with the underlying parallel to Disney World, which is a theme park, not an appropriate use for low-density residential. It would definitely change the integrity of the zoning ordinance. Again, for the Jellystone franchise website, geared towards owners and investors, why choose Jellystone? Quote, "If you want to grow your RV park or campground business beyond renting campsites, then consider speaking with us." Jim Westover, VP of Sales and Product Developer from Jellystone Resorts, noted in rejournals.com, quote, "Each Jellystone park gets about 30% of its income from visitors buying souvenirs. Then there are the added attractions. Spending within the park is what we get people to do," end quote. Just like a theme park or water park such as Water Country in Portsmouth. They will clearly make more money off of these added attractions than the campsites themselves. Our low-density residential zone does not permit commercial enterprises, retail, water parks, or theme parks, as they are not explicitly mentioned. Although not open to the general public for complimentary use, consistent with their other resorts, Mr. Bosenbrook stated at the April 5th, 2018 ZBA meeting that day passes could be allowed if campsites were not filled to capacity. At their other resorts, they charge $30 per person per day, plus a $5 per fee vehicle. Again, this may be a way to create more revenue versus renting camps and sites. The intent of our ordinance is for camping at a campground, not for daily admission to a resort, water park, or theme park. Most people would not pay this fee, which is consistent with water country in Portsmouth, if they only wanted to go swimming, fishing, boating, or access the lake. They would utilize the town beach for $4 per person, which is complete with a playground and boat launch. Some of the other attractions at Northgate Resorts are poolside cabanas for an extra cost, water play, laser tag arenas for extra cost, lazy rivers, multiple water slides up to 400 feet in length, pedaled go-karts and tracks, personal bear visits, a Boo Boo's Camp, which is an indoor ninja obstacle course for an extra cost, escape rooms, boat rentals, fishing and pontoon boats, a bear camp water park at Westward Shores, a 4,485 square foot inflatable water accessory anchored in the lake, a Thunderdome, live music and entertainment located on the beach at Westward Shores, pub and pizzeria. The applicant has been extremely vague in this application by history, actions, and interviews. It is clear that this proposal for, quote, water and other attractions, end quote, is not as appropriate as it can be assumed Northgate's Resorts is attempting to include a water park, a theme park, a resort. According to the state of New Hampshire, let us remember, quote, unless a particular use for which an application is submitted is stated in the ordinance as being explicitly allowed by special exception, the Board of Adjustment is powerless to grant a special exception for that use, end quote. You can call it whatever you want. A campground is a campground. A water park is a water park. A theme park is a theme park. An amusement park is an amusement park. And a resort is a resort. Only one is explicitly allowed by special exception by our zoning ordinance. Thank you for your time. I'd like to submit this for the record.
Thank you very much.
And then I have pictures of attractions at their different locations.
I want to see the demonstration. I'm not speaking with the demonstration.
All right. Any other public comment? I saw your hand first, sir.
All I can say is I'm glad she's on my side. I'm not sure if she's given you the same photos that I had, so I'm going to duplicate, because I go through and show the other water parks that the facility, this organization has, laser tag sites, the restaurant, the pub, the things like that. And as she said, your ordinance does not allow those. One thing that I find of interest, your zoning ordinance expressly calls out, makes a distinction. She was absolutely right on the definition of camping ground. On page 5 of your ordinance, you have a broader definition in hotel, motel, or inn. A type of lodging facility that is a commercial establishment containing rooming units for transient lodging, which routinely provides additional services, such as restaurants, meeting rooms, recreational facilities. Your ordinance does not allow hotels, motels, and inns in the low-density zone. They need a variance for what they really want to do. These also, remember at the April 5th meeting, Mr. Bosenbeck said it's a water feature. It's 8 inches of pool for the kiddies to run around in. If you look at page 1, sheet 1 here, in this amenities area that the gentleman raised reference to, you see the squiggles. You see the squiggles in that location. Those squiggles are just in what's in front of you. It's water slide features. You get a little bit bigger view of it on page 3. That part of the amenities area placard is put over. They're obviously intending what is seen in the photos there, and your ordinance does not allow that, because you define camping grounds only as the camping sites. That's it. That's what camping ground is allowed. I know you've had experience, you indicated that at the prior meeting, Mr. Rawson, of being in other facilities. but those other facilities aren't having to comply with your local zoning ordinance. If the voters wanted something different, they have to make it different through the meeting process of town meeting in March to change your ordinance to add what they would like to do. And let me ask, did you give them all of those shots? Because if she has given them to you, I won't duplicate you with other things. And while she's looking through, may I ask, as a courtesy, Mr. Chairman, to take judicial notice of the prior submittals that I gave you on the park model, so I don't have to give you copies again of those and any of the other materials that I had provided?
Yes, I do.
Wonderful. She's given you everything that I would have given you on that point. But as you go through, you see the shots, and on page 2, yes, indeed, the little girl's about 8 inches of water, but she has 40 or 50 feet of water slide above her in creating this. Other shots show the laser tag facilities, the cabana restaurant facilities, and obviously, as Ms. Boucher indicated, their object is to keep the customers there. That's where they're making their extra revenue. Those revenues are not going to be flowing out into the community. The other thing is, my favorite is the bar at the back end. Restaurant and food service is not an allowed use in your low density zone. As fate would have it, the union leader gave us an article today, again on a water park issue over at Canopy Lake, showing much the same thing in the way of a feature as shown on the plans that the applicant has before you. That is a feature that is common in amusement parks. My kids love them over the time. Sorry. Did you get one of her photos? Yeah.
Thank you.
Got it. Okay. Another for you. I find it interesting that, and this is talking about the addition of a lazy river feature that is around and adding on to their existing water slide park. The last page, actually it's 3-page, at the bottom of the second page, states that the tidal river will use 320,000 gallons of water. True, they aren't planning one now, but I think they are saying the slides and the run-out pool, this carries over from the bottom of 3 to the top of 2, use another 33 gallons of water. 33,000 gallons of water. This is a substantial amount of water for us. They're talking about putting other wells in. That is an impact on the adjoining properties. The other thing, there was a question that was raised on the cabins versus the bungalows. It's the first time I've heard that phrase used in our in the various presentations. I take it those are the park models. The mini mobile homes is my phrase for them, the materials we showed. Those have been skirted. It's our understanding that between half a dozen and 12 are already been moved on to site. To the best of our knowledge, no site plan approval has been issued for that change, which would be necessary to put a solid structure for a commercial operation into this facility. The other thing that we have seen, and we don't know what this is, what we might be a massive trampoline or something that is going in substantial site work. And it's next to one of the cabins. So again, a lot is going on that you need to frankly stop until the actual permits from you and from the planning board are received. My position to you is this is not an appropriate facility, an appropriate location for the uses that they are asking for. They need a variance at the very least, and this amount, adding even 95 location sites on this property that only has 147 acres of developable land. Their original application said that. Their current one, I don't believe, still does. So you have you're adding 95 homes. And as the lady behind me indicated, can everybody do that level of density in our low density zone? Please find that they do not meet the first criteria.
Yes, sir.
Steve Hayes, 104 Lakeside. Very brief statement here, but I'm not in any way coordinated with Katie's wonderful presentation. My wife and I have attended every ZBA meeting where this application has been discussed. We believe that some of the ZBA members perceive an anti-camper sentiment from the campground neighbors. Such is simply not the case. Many of us bought neighboring properties knowing the campground was nearby, accepting there would be some noise, some smoke, some brief periods of high traffic, some wanderers, even some kayak and boaters in need of help once in a while. Others have inherited their properties, some from multiple generations, and return every year because of the quality of life possible here and now. Please do not think we are trying to exclude others from experiencing what we have here. We are also not trying to force the campground into a time lock with no changes. We are trying to protect the neighborhood area so others can have the same opportunities. Our concern is that we see a campground being converted into a resort, and then in the years to come, an amusement park with lodging. The second thing I'd like to note is that I've heard a couple times tonight already that the current proposal is for 95 sites. This is not true. This is a deception. The current proposal is for 124 additional sites. 124 more sites is a 56% increase. What the ZBA is being asked to do is to pre-approve tonight the additional 29 sites so that when and if in the future they want to go to the full 124, they can skip you folks and go directly to the planning board. The total number of sites would then be 347. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Norman Turgeon, 88 Lakeside Drive, Milton. And I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Three Pond Protected Association. With respect to standard number 1, which says that the specific site is an appropriate location for the proposed use, we say the specific site abuts the northeast pond shoreline. And this feature of the site's location is what makes the location inappropriate for the proposed use. The proposed use, of course, we all know, is an expanded campground. Why? Because an expanded campground at this location threatens the northeast pond with increased non-point source pollution, included the dreaded phosphorus that comes from stormwater runoff. It threatens the northeast pond with overuse by motorboats because of additional motorboats. It threatens the northeast pond and other regional water bodies with the spread of invasive aquatic plant on account of more boats coming in and out of there. I'd like to enumerate a few facts, some data about the northeast pond and about the condition of the water there. These form part of the basis for our conclusion that these threats are real. The northeast pond's water quality, as evaluated by the UNH Lake Lakes Monitoring Program, over the last 22 years is considered overall to be mesotrophic, which means fair, on a scale of good, fair, and poor. The biggest threat to our ponds is phosphorus, which comes from sediment carried by stormwater runoff. Phosphorus is a nutrient, promotes microscopic plant growth, it leads to green algae blooms, potentially toxic cyanobacteria. We started monitoring phosphorus levels about 12 years ago. When it became perfectly obvious to us that phosphorus was probably one of our biggest problems and our biggest threats. The Northeast Pond phosphorus concentrations over the last 12 years have oscillated from year to year. Some years it's rated poor, some years it comes out rated fair. But it's been, overall, over the 12 years, it has remained stable. I have, and I'll provide that to you, a copy of a summary of the report of our water quality sampling based on what was done in 2017. This is not going to be a lecture on this, it's just going to show you that there's a circle over here and there's 4 quadrants, and each quadrant represents one of the things that we measure, which are indicators of water quality. 3 of the 4 are colored yellow, which means fair. The one that's colored red is total phosphorus content. So in 2017, our measurements of total phosphorus content on the Northeast Pond came out to be just pushing us over into the poor category. Not terribly poor, but not fair. So it is a concern. Phosphorus is a concern. We all know it comes from stormwater runoff. That's the biggest source around here. We all know that developed land leads to more stormwater runoff and the sediment it carries. More dirt roads leads to more sediment. Sediment includes phosphorus, which is in the soils. Now, the Northeast Pond, changing the subject, is a small pond. It's only 645 acres, and it averages 10 feet in depth. It's not a big pond like Ospey or Saki, but it's really tiny. Around its perimeter, on the Lebanon shoreline and on the Milton shoreline of the Northeast Pond, there are, based on a tax map, 190 waterfront lots. This does not include the North campground. And, well, we would approximate less than 600 residents. The Mighty Joe Campground currently has 220 campsites and 3 cabins. At 4 people per site, that equates to 892 residents today. Almost one and a half times as many as there are on all the waterfront lots around the Northeast Pond. The proposed expansion would increase the number of residents not increase by, but the number of residents would now be 1,388. That's based on an addition of 124. Because when I read the narrative of the proposal, it said they were seeking permission for 95 with the provision that there would be another 29 later, subject only to the permission of the planning board. So with respect to the zoning board of adjustment, they are really asking for permission for an exception that would allow them to build 124 additional sites. With 1,388 residents, that would be a little over 2.3 times the number of residents on waterfront lots that would come from the Northeast Pond. Just to give you a little perspective on, you know, what's that going to mean to boat traffic and use and stormwater runoff. The third biggest threat to our New Hampshire and Maine lakeside ponds are invasive aquatic plants. And you all know that we already have our hands full dealing with the European naiad and preventing its spread to other water bodies in the region. Now, increased boat traffic of all kinds that results from the proposed expansion is intolerable. Look at the boats. Most of the boats that are with residents, they get put in the water and they get taken out of the ponds and they get put back in. They don't go elsewhere, most of them. The ones that come into the campground site, they come from out of town. They're not there for a whole long time. I'm not sure what the average in and out period is for a boat. Say a couple of weeks. Think about that. How many 2-week periods are there in the entire summer? How many new boats are coming in and going out and going to other campsites? In their application, in the narrative, they say that they will make provisions for, they will require the boat owners to wash their boats in and out. That's really not good enough. They really need to be inspected carefully and washed both in and out. And the last and third biggest threat to our ponds is increased boat traffic. There are already too many boats churning up to this pond, especially on weekends. Now I don't know how much motorboat traffic the ponds can stand. All I know is that there's going to be a lot more with this expansion, and it's already a problem. You just get over there sometime on a weekend, and you're taking your safety, and you're taking your life in your hands, dodging the 65-mile-an-hour personal watercraft and all kinds of other boats out there that are churning around. It's a bad problem now. It's only going to get worse. That concludes my input on this stand.
Thank you.
You
would,
to use about that?
well, yeah, you would have to respond to me.
Yes, that's what I'm going to do. Talking about us checking boats and going with the weed and stuff, we did send 2 of our employees to that class to certify them to check the boats. Starting now, once they go to the class in June. And we are spotting our boats.
100% in, 100% out?
Correct. And they're going to be washed. I have two kids that are going to be at the location. It's called a quick check-in, where most of our campers that come in are already prepaid. So they get a slip, and it's a fast check-in, and they just get sent through the gate. They go right to their site. It slows down the traffic at the gate. We'll have a boy there inspecting the boats. If he runs into a problem, he'll be able to call the next kid to come over, inspect the boat, and do what we have to do, keep everything moving, and inspect the boat so they don't keep carrying that. We also are donating a lot of money toward that lead thing that we're doing for them too, so we are getting involved.
Okay, thank you. Pardon me?
On water?
Sure.
I would just point out that what he's just said, I think you ought to treat as a change to their application, because it is something different. It is a good offer. It is a great thing that you're going to be doing. It kind of diminishes our concern about the spread of invasive weeds, but you know, I'm not going to catch them all. But I do think that the narrative of their application says that they're going to require the owners of the boats to wash boats. It says nothing about inspecting the boats. It says nothing about their staff being trained to inspect the boats. And so if that's something that you're going to consider, treat it as a change to their application. That be a specific condition upon which the special exception would be granted, if you choose to grant special exception.
I'm sorry, Doug, if I may ask your input on whether or not that might constitute a change in this application?
I don't believe it does.
I mean, I didn't see anything that said it one way or the other, so the fact that it's being proposed, I don't.
If it turned out that, let's say hypothetically, that this turned out to be the only issue that was holding the board up, if the board felt that rather than the inspection, rather than what was first discussed, this more intensive review needed to be a part, the board has the authority to impose it as a condition of an approval.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, other public input? Yes, sir.
As I understand,
Name and address, please.
Barry Bark, excuse me, I'm getting these allergies. Barry Barco, Lakeside Drive. And I don't want to overstep this first issue because I know there are 4 more to come. So, as I understand, the question is whether this proposal falls within the ordinance, and that's it, right? Whether the applicants have shown you a proposal which even falls within the special exception, and the suggestion has been made that what they should be seeking is a variance, not a special exception. And so on that point, I would just say, yeah, it seems like the burden is on the applicant to show that what they are proposing is a campground as was envisioned when this ordinance was written, which was written obviously with the intent of, it's a low-density zone. There's a campground that's been there for decades, and we can't zone the campground out of there. So yes, campground is okay as a special exception. That's the campground that is talked about in the ordinance, and that's the campground that fits within the neighborhood that everybody who has, in my case, in the case of lots of people here, have been there for generations, for people who have purchased places recently, for people who have been making very expensive renovations for the purpose of complying with all of the lakefront demands and protecting the lake. That is the neighborhood that the special exception applies to. Simply calling this a campground and saying, well, the word campground is in the special exception, doesn't even come close to satisfying the applicant's burden. The applicant's burden, and I would say that their submission doesn't come close to satisfying the burden because it is so vague that we and you don't really know what is going to happen there. I would say everything has been vague, even the number of sites. I mean, on page 2 of their application, it says, and another 29 sites subject to planning board approval. Well, that's what you would be approving, is those 29 sites. So they can say 94, but they're actually asking you to approve ultimately 100, whatever it is, 134 sites. They're saying amenities, and there's been a lot of testimony as to what this company means by amenities. It means a whole array of amenities, of things for people to enjoy, which are not specified here, which you don't know whether you're approving them or not. But if you've approved this application, you have approved them. So I understand that this is a company that is looking, that has purchased an ongoing, successful campground, popular campground, and which they could just keep running. They could be making the kinds of improvements that are consistent with keeping the campground running and modern, and maybe there is room for more campgrounds. Density, of course, is one of the big issues. But that's not what this proposal is. There's no clarity in this proposal as to what it really is that's going to happen there. And that burden was on the applicant, is on the applicant, and is not met in their proposal. All these vague statements about, well, it's going to be a campground, it's going to be very campground-ish, it's going to be the kinds of things that you see at other campgrounds, that's vague. That's not something, you don't know what you're agreeing to if you agree to say that that falls within the word campground in a special exception. I understand, you know, the modern business model of there's an asset, you try and maximize the return on that asset. Unfortunately, anybody who lives around here, or particularly lives on that area, it's the peninsula, whatever, the Townhouse Road, the Lakeside Drive area, knows that that's not the nature of the neighborhood. It is not the nature of the neighborhood. People deliberately leave acres and acres and acres and acres of land undeveloped and forested. They deliberately do this because we're trying to keep it as a low density, relaxed, campy type area. And allowing a corporation to come in with no real idea of what the neighborhood has been like and why people are there and why people have been in there for generations and keep coming back. It's understandable, but it does not fall within the idea of the intent of allowing campgrounds a special exception in the ordinance. We're not there to maximize the return on our property. We're there to have a low density, relaxed experience in life.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Chip Harlow, Town of Lebanon. I'm here tonight speaking as a representative. I'm the chairman of the select board, and so I'm representing the town. I've had discussions, emails, conversations with residents and concerned people in Lebanon where this is a regional impact. That's why I'm here to speak to you tonight. I'll make it really, the first one really easy. Everybody has more or less said what I was going to say, so for your guidance, I will not repeat. I'm only going to say it looks like a duck, smells like a duck, quacks like a duck. Replace duck with resort. You can call it what you want. I don't know where, at what level, how many campgrounds you get. When does that become, that threshold turn into something else? You all call it tonight, everybody's saying it's a campground. I'd argue that it's a resort that you're building, if you want to call it a theme park or something else. But I don't think it's a campground anymore that's being proposed. So that's all we do with them.
Thank you, sir. Other input? Yes, sir, in the back there.
Kevin Gilman, 103 Lakeside Drive. Those bungalows that are there, okay? I'd like to know how they're being able to use them, not being permitted. They are sitting on cinder blocks. They are hardwired. They have PVC sewer lines that run to them that don't have a hose that disconnects like an RV. They have PVC pipes all the way up to it. They have propane hookups to them for their hot water and everything. Okay, all hardwired. And they have skirts all the way around. It's not something you can hook up to, disconnect a couple links and drive away. That thing, it's gonna take you a day, 2 days to disconnect, to move. If I had done something like that at my camp, someone would be there stopping me from doing that. I want to know why they haven't been stopped. And they're renting them, they're making money off them, and they put them in without no permits. I want to know how they're doing this.
Thank you.
I've been trying to call the building inspector all week. I can't get a hold of anybody.
Okay, thank you.
How do we address that?
Thank you. I don't have an answer to that specifically, but thank you.
Anna, what's his hours?
Brian works Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. He is out of the office intermittently for inspections. If you leave a message, he should be able to get back to you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Jen King, 38 Lakeside Drive. Since the beginning of this process, this room has been overwhelmingly filled with residents and neighbors of Mighty Joe expressing their concerns and asking you not to let this exception happen. By definition, an exception is something that doesn't follow a rule. We have zoning rules in place to protect our community. We don't need to bend or break them by granting an exception to accommodate a business that most of the people in this room think will reduce their quality of life and property in Milton. Can be granted doesn't mean should be granted. At the last meeting in the straw votes, you recognized the impact and damage that this resort development would have in 2 out of the 5 criteria. As everyone knows, we didn't get to the last 2. With the writing on the wall, they've come back to reduce their size of their development with the intent to keep adding in phases. If it wasn't going to be good for the community May 3rd, smaller numbers now, followed by future expansions, will still lead to the same harmful end results. A seasonal family campground may work in a low-density residential district, but a larger manufactured home resort and water park on a fragile pond ecosystem will not. I spoke to Professor James Haney from UNH. He's a Milton resident. He couldn't be here tonight because he's training people on monitoring lakes for the EPA. But he told me I could share how he summed things up for me. More people equals more activity, which equals more phosphorus released into Northeast Pond. How? Through a bunch of different ways. Skin oils and suntan lotions, which, by the way, kill the good algae. They both have phosphorus in them and are brought into the lake by the swimmers. Urine from these swimmers also has a very high level of phosphorus. Phosphorus leads to bloom of cyanobacteria, the bad stuff. We're talking about adding 120 families for the season. Thanks to Norma, we now know how many tax lots there are on the lake already. But I'd like to know what the tax base of the residents compares to what the Mighty Joe contribution to the town would be. In addition, the water from the proposed water park, in addition, the water from the proposed water park also has to be treated somewhere that won't affect the ponds. They found out a swimming pool on the UNH campus was the source polluting the nearby stream. A higher volume of boats will stir up sediments and nutrients the same way we stir up a garden plant. The most vulnerable parts of the pond are the shallowest parts, i.e. the northern section of Northeast Pond where the campground is located. Why are we sacrificing our lake for their profit? What happens upstream affects downstream. This will affect all 3 water bodies. Dr. Haney does not propose banning swimming or boating. He just wants us to realize that too much activity could be detrimental to Milton Free Ponds. Canopy Lake is a good example of a lake that was polluted due to too much activity. Another significant impact of an expansion is the ash from bonfires and particulates, which according to Smithsonian Magazine can run off rivers and lakes, introducing chemicals and altering the pH of the watershed, which could cause widespread harm to fish and other animals living in or near the watershed. We've talked before about all the detrimental effects that the smoke will have on the neighbors. Short-term effects, irritated eyes, throats, sinuses, lungs, headaches, reduced lung function, especially in kids. Lung inflammation or swelling, increased risk of lower respiratory diseases, more severe or frequent symptoms from existing lung diseases. I have 4 wheezers in my house. Asthma, emphysema, pneumonia, bronchitis. Increased risk of heart attack and stroke, and long-term it could be chemical changes and structural changes in the lungs and cancer. In addition, Mighty Joe representatives have been less than honest with us about their intent to sell day passes and disclose the full intended uses and amenities of their new project. Traffic counts based on current camper car traffic sounds like the tip of the iceberg and seems a misrepresentative if they're selling day passes as well. And also they mentioned they're parking for additional guests. Who will be checking their vacancies and admissions for the camper-only usage that they claim? Who will be monitoring the boat washing station to make sure that their staff are doing a good job, if they have a staff doing it, which is new tonight? Who monitors their dock space to make sure they're not tying boats all the way up into that little creek there? Who will pay for invasive species abatement if the problems worsen with the added users? I don't trust them. A new set of campground rules doesn't pay for the mitigation of invasive species. A new set of rules won't fund this town if all our property values diminish in a cloud of campfire smoke and algae blooms. Our neighbors in Lebanon don't want this, the abutters don't want this. The town master plan doesn't want this. A big part of the master plan is preserving our rural way of life. With Yogi Barrack, a water slide of a glorified manufactured home park? The risks of this special exception far outweigh the rewards. It's time to say no. How many more revisions and do-overs are we going to give them? The neighbors aren't going to go away. We feel strongly that it is not only detrimental to our neighborhood, it is not the appropriate location for this resort. The 3 ponds, as Norm said, are already under tremendous strain. When I taught junior sailing, we used to see how many kids you could put in a little Optimus sailing dinghy before it sank. Adding hundreds more families to the lake to see how much more human impact it can withstand might have grave consequences. The most important statement said throughout all these meetings is that you can't undo this if you get this wrong. Please listen to the members of this community that have come out to make their views known while you so kindly give your time, meeting after meeting after meeting. Please deny the exception.
Thank you. Any other public input? Yes, sir.
Richard Burke, 36 Lakeside Drive. I was looking at some of the zoning ordinance, and first let me say with respect to RVs, my understanding of most RVs, I don't own one, is that they become, in many cases, a primary or secondary home for people. As far as tax law goes, they can be written off as a second home. So in fact, these are seasonal homes that are going to be placed on this site, a goodly number of them. And I don't know, what are they going to have, 3 or 4 people for each one of those sites? Those would be considered a dwelling unit. They have everything that our ordinances talk about as a dwelling unit, a bathroom, kitchen, things like that. So what are we talking about? A tiny home. Same would be for the park models. There was some argument earlier on about whether or not they were manufactured housing. The applicant was saying, no, it wasn't manufactured housing. Well, in fact, they're tiny homes. They have all of the features. They are permanently mounted at this point. My understanding from our ordinance is, yes, they do have to have a permit. If they don't have a permit, and it says here, permit shall be obtained prior to the undertaking of any activity regulated by this ordinance or for the construction, erection, alteration, movement, or placement of any structure. Park models are dwelling units. Park models are manufactured housing. We wouldn't have a manufactured housing park in that location. And I guess my argument to you all is that this is becoming a seasonal residential area. It certainly does not bring in the tax money that a seasonal cottage does. I know, I had one. I now have changed it to a home. I know what my taxes are. Relative to acreage, their taxes for the whole, and I'd like to have clarification on one point. I think we were always saying this was 225 acres, is that correct?
Is that correct? 220, how many acres?
225.
225. I believe at our last meeting, Steve raised the issue about the boundaries within which the 225 acres was calculated, and indicated that the boundary was out over the water. You notice it's not there, so they have agreed that the boundary, as previously stated, included 225 acres. That has been corrected. I don't know what that acreage is, but they haven't adjusted the acreage in their current application. Any numbers that are associated with that are faulty. Probably not by a large amount, but again, who checks their checker? This is important. They can throw numbers around, but who's checking these numbers? The ordinance talks about the sale, rental of recreation equipment. Just recently, I noticed that they had a post about new golf carts that are going to be available for rent in the park. If you look at some of the comments from last year at their park up north of here, almost consistently in every comment that I saw, one of the things that affected the people who were actually camping there was everybody was ignoring the speed limits, especially the folks that had the golf carts, and they were a little bit inebriated. Okay? Now they've indicated that the speed is going to be 5 miles per hour, and they said it's supposed to be insanely slow. And if you're driving there and at 5 miles an hour you feel it's insanely slow, you're doing the right thing. That's not happening at the other campgrounds. I believe it's not going to happen on this one. The other thing is that it's not allowed in our ordinance because it's the sale, rental of recreation equipment. They're going to rent boats. They're renting trailers. These are motor vehicles. At least their documents say these are motorized golf carts. Park models they're renting. That's recreational equipment. And in the ordinance there was a chart, I can't find it right now, but it goes down through and says what's permitted, what's special exception, what's not permitted. They said they had a snack bar. I think I read before that it was a cafe, sit-down cafe or restaurant type thing. If that's the case, that's not allowed. It's not allowed in a low-density residential zone. So, like others, consistent with others, my feeling is we're not being told the right story. Recently I was reading about campgrounds and people that were interested in purchasing them asking for some input. And what the common theme was is when you get one of these campgrounds, one, it's a lot of work. There's no question about it. But the marketplace demands require them to continually expand and come up with new draws for the public. And we're seeing that taking place with this application. So there will be continuing to add other amenities. They have to. The numbers have to grow. If they don't grow, they're going to die. So you can take that to the bank. They are going to expand it. Everybody in the literature talks about that. And that's enough, I think, for now.
Thank you. Other public input? Yes, sir.
I have a sidebar for what Norman was saying a little bit earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, your name and address.
I'm sorry, Roland Mann, Hideaway Lane. Sidebar what Norman was saying. The average depth is 7 feet. My comment comes from the safety of being on the water, whether it's pontoon boats, kayaks, skiers, people pulling tubes. If you look at the lake itself, I'm sure that at headway speed, or recreation speed of skiers and being pulled on tubes, that our actual acreage for doing such things is very small. Add in the fact that we have a number of islands, we have a number of sandbars, and we have a number of rocks submerged, which are marked on the lake throughout. So, with the addition of what we've talked about, ultimately maybe 124 new sites, that's gotta bring on more boating of various kinds. So my point is I'm leading up to is, I would think any responsible state waters, including Lebanon, the state of Maine, is that there's a responsibility to increase safety observation on Milton 3 ponds. So that means to me is that we have in the past had state police making their marine patrols, and we also have had the town of Milton with police control. I would expect that if there was an increase in boat traffic of that significance, that it's a responsibility of the town of Milton to afford the cost updates, maintaining a boat and an individual's pay to be monitoring that lake much more than it ever has before. And the last comment is about safety is that I believe, the last I knew, is that in order to be going full speed out in recreation speed, if you will, again skiing, pulling tubes, what have you, is that you should maintain a distance of 150 feet away from any dock, any other boat, or any shoreline, okay, going at a minimal, maximum speed that is allowed. That's a very concern of mine, and I would leave that thought with the board of, you know, it's going to be a cost, I would foresee, to the town of Milton.
Thank you. I saw another hand go up over here somewhere. Yes, sir.
Oh, my name is Gene Boucher, 220 Townhouse Road. I'd like to argue that the specific site as depicted in the diagrams is not appropriate for the proposed use as the applicant has portrayed. From the minutes from the September 7th, 2017 zoning board meeting, it was explained by one of our board members that through previous legal proceedings with the campground in 2012, an agreement was made with the town and the campground was approved as it was, including some additional new buildings. This was done as the campground had been there prior to the town having any zoning ordinance. It would appear that the definition for camping ground was created to honor what was already in place, as the parcel was then placed in a low-density residential zone. It would not have been right to order them to shut down, so accommodations were made to permit the establishment as is. Although approval was granted for what existed, the approval does not make it appropriate for any expansion whatsoever or any change in proposed use. I would further argue that if that were a blank canvas and this application were in front of you, it would likely not be approved. There have been some additional arguments I had on here regarding illegal operation of hotels. It should be shut down. Other amenities that are operational that are not permitted in the low-density residential zone are food and drink services, expanded retail stores, and theaters. I'd like to submit this all for the record.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Other public input? Okay. I have an email. Believe me, I'll have plenty of time to speak in a moment if that's all right. All right. I have an email from an abutter, John Locke, off of Bowen Road. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to put that into the record. But was this part of everyone's packet up here? Okay. So it's an abutter that is expressing some concerns regarding property lines and campers crossing those property lines and not respecting those. Actually, I'll bet you have that. Okay. All right. Okay, yes, sir.
This is the first time I've heard that there was an agreement associated with the campground in 2012. I knew that they had received a special a site plan approval in 2012, and the applicant's narrative says it was associated with a building. If there is an agreement, I strongly suggest that that be examined, because as Mr. Boucher indicated, there could be terms that the prior owner has deeded away, and this thing should not be considered at all. So I respectfully move that that document be found, be made part of the record before we take any more time.
Thank you. Other public input? Okay, I'm going to close the public comment session on that now. Chris, do you recall that agreement? You would have been potentially on one of the boards at that time.
No, I don't.
Okay.
The approval letter says that the plans submitted for the site plan were approved.
I'm sorry?
The approval letter, for the decision letter that was sent out, it says that the plans submitted for site plan were approved.
In 2012?
Yeah.
Did it have conditions on it?
No.
Thank you. That would be good. We've probably gotten that way back at the beginning, but possibly.
No agreement.
That's simply what it says.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you. All right, I'll read this out loud. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Marique, at the Planning Board meeting on May 1st, 2012, the Planning Board voted unanimously to approve your application as presented for site plan review for a proposed additional building property located at 111 Mighty Joe Road, tax map 28, lot 4 in Milton, New Hampshire. All requests and requirements of the Planning Board have been met. If you should have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. And that was signed by Wendy Keene, the land use clerk, on June 5th, 2012. Okay.
People can have that. I have
do you
the
have
whole
them?
file.
Okay.
Could we get town council to give us his take on the ordinance itself and whether this does fall in line or does not fall in line of the ordinance?
Do you mean in terms of campsite versus?
We've heard a lot of argument stating that it's against the ordinance. I want to see what our town attorney says, if that's accurate or not.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Well, I don't have the ordinance in front of me right now, but and I'm not the decision maker.
Right.
You are. If there's something about the proposal, and again, let's put this hypothetically, because I don't want to suggest what I think as to which way the board should vote, because I'm not a decision maker in this case. But if there's something you've heard about tonight or in the course of these hearings that you don't believe fits in the definition of campground as it's used in the town of Milton, as it's contained in the Milton zoning ordinance, you can either use that as a basis for denial, or you can approve with the exception of, or with the condition that that portion of the proposal that you think is offensive to the ordinance is excluded from your approval.
Do you have the ordinance in front of us? I think that was the whole thing.
This is a whole zoning board ordinance. But his point ultimately is, it is our job to interpret that, to interpret whether this meets that. Other questions at this point from the board? I will ask the question here. You do indicate here that this application is for 95 units, but it does in fact state 29 campsites for future planning board approval. So I would argue that you really are asking for that higher number, and you're asking this board to approve that higher number, correct?
No, that's one of the points I'll address. I can address it now, or just it's in my points to talk about when it's my turn. But do you want me to address it now? Want me to address it now, or do you want to wait?
I'm going to have you wait a moment. We're going to take. Can I get a motion for a quick recess?
Recess.
Thank you. Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Approved. Thank you. No, we don't. No, we don't. No, that's what things. I don't need to. You're reform but okay, so I'll just
the same thing.
The proposal is getting more focused.
Traffic was not.
Always trying about half hour late, but they want you there.
Well, we've been spoiled because all the other times that my wife has been in there, I didn't think she could. This time,
when I was young and beardless, the argument of the beard made no sense to me. And then the question became, how many hairs make a beard? Certainly not 100, but possibly 1,000. If 1,000, why not 999? And where does the incremental black and white
I don't mind
make the switch?
Clearly there was some interest. Yeah, thank you.
I gotta pay.
Folks, I'm going to give this 2 more minutes and then we're going to bring it back.
Better now.
Just physically. Yes. Okay, I thought for a second you were some pain. I was a little concerned.
No, I was
Well, this is interesting. I thought
you know what?
about campground.
Are we still?
We are being recorded.
In that case, I will not give you the definition.
Thank you.
We don't know if the other person's ordinances are. We don't know what agreements they have.
I mean, if let's say you're here fire and range, or dirt track, is there a file or a segment of this?
The abatement or the segment?
You'd have to rely on it. Well, this is in other words, they're just talking about that industry. Meat camping is
low density commercial campsites, special exception, it's all similar. It doesn't say you can't have one.
It doesn't define it, but you have to then look at the definitions.
Right, where's that, where's the definition?
Yeah, there was an abatement. They were talking about an abatement.
Okay, folks, I'm going to ask everyone to take their seats.
It was kind of like a gathering. It was obviously it had already been.
Just so you know, there are like 2 more people waiting.
They say 7, rounding up.
There'll be 2 more after that if we don't go.
I didn't have. Yeah, I don't know.
That's a lot of things, recreation.
Okay, discuss it. Not only like I understand. I'm running out of room over here. I need a side table. I'm really glad. I'm on the way over to Manchester.
A little bit that I've read.
Buy it and get on sale.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to call us back into session.
Come in during the week.
Okay.
It's a pretty big
All right, thank you. So I'll bring it back to the board for additional, no, I'm sorry, I believe,
You have to call
that's
it
my
back.
notes. Mr. Malia was going to
Michael,
explain,
you have
yes.
to call it back in session.
I did.
Okay, sorry, I missed it.
Yes, I know, there was a lot of talking
Wow.
going on. Okay, so Mr. Malia, you had a response to my question regarding the number of actual units we're approving or discussing this evening.
Yes, we're only asking you to approve the 95 sites. The additional 29 sites were shown on the amended plan. Your attorney asked me a question about that. He said, is it your intention that you will be seeking approval for those additional 29 sites from the zoning board so that in the future, when you're ready to put them in, you won't have to come back to the zoning board, you'll only have to go to the planning board? And I said, that is our intent, and he said, I don't think you can do that. Whether or not I agree with him or not, that was his opinion, so he said, please, he asked me to clarify. So I talked to my clients and we clarified just to try to make it simple and eliminate any confusion. We're just asking for approval of the 95 sites. If we want to later develop the additional 29 sites, we would need both ZBA and planning board approval. We accept your town council's opinion on that. That could be a condition of approval, so we're just basically showing you where the next phase of campsites might go at some point in the future, but we'd have to come back to you and the planning board if we wanted to develop those sites. So we're just at 95 tonight.
Okay, thank you. And Walter, so they don't need to resubmit this with different numbers? It's not a change in that case because it's on the record and so forth? Okay, thank you. Other board members?
If you want to respond to the other.
Oh, what was the other?
Comments, if I could.
Oh,
But close the
period.
Well, I would like to see, well, he's the applicant, he gets to still do some more talking. Let's see where the board takes it for the moment, and if there's answered pieces at the end that you'd like to answer, that would be fine. But, so let's see where the board wants to go with some questions.
Well, if I may, on the ordinance campground, a plot of ground upon which 2 or more campsites are located, established or maintained for occupancy by camping units of the general public as temporary living quarters for recreation, education, or vacation purposes. The recreation, education, or vacation purposes is what I'm stuck on here. That's very vague. That could represent going to Vegas. You know what I mean? I'm saying seriously, that's a vacation to some people. I think that to say that what they're asking for is against the ordinance, in my view, is not correct. Because the ordinance does not say you can't have that. It says recreation, vacation.
Okay.
A lot of people think different of what vacation is and what recreation is. Some people like hiking, some people like snowshoeing, some people like go snowmobiling. Some, and not everybody agrees on what they want to do for vacations. So that's why I have a problem with that to say that it's not, to say it is against our ordinance. You want to read that?
No, and I'd give you the, remember the TV show Point Counterpoint?
Yeah.
60 minutes ago. I'll give you the counter to that. We do have a master plan. It does talk about open areas. It talks about the rural nature of Milton. I've been on the planning board when we've gone through our design charrettes and our surveys and really tried to update the master plan. And we really haven't deviated that I've seen in the 23 years I've been here. We've had someone from south of here move up to Grandview Circle and wanted lights. Said all my neighbors would love lights. Went around and asked all 12 neighbors. None of the neighbors want street lights. I mean, I work in Hampton. If you want a theme park, buy a house in Hampton. It has 17 bars within walking distance or stumbling distance. It has arcades. It has beachfront. It has water slides. It has parking lots. It has traffic. It has bikinis. It has something for everybody. It truly is an amusement park. Why don't I live in Hampton? Because I'd rather live in Milton. Why? Because when I go out at night, there's no street lights. I can see the stars. I hear birds. I don't hear motorcycles. I don't hear horns. I don't hear any of that. So each community, defined through its own master plan, defines what is recreation or vacation. Okay? Having said that, I really thought tonight I was coming to hear about a campground expansion. I'm kind of surprised about all the other amenities that are included within the application. But I do want to hear more about how those amenities and or the campground affect the other 4 criteria. So as far as the application being clear, as clear as what's on the paper. Can't get much clearer. I agree with the town attorney that it is our job to decide what the campground means, if they can expand the campground, and under what terms they can expand the campground. So, that's my thought, without hearing the rest of the application, or the other 4 criteria. And we still haven't heard from Attorney Point Counterpoint on his response to the public's comments with respect to item 1. So, I haven't prejudged it, but I still need to hear more.
Right now, we're just talking about number 1 anyway, so.
Yes, he's acknowledged that.
Yeah. But to say that I can't hear 1 and understand 1 without also knowing 2, 3, 4, and 5. they are related, and they are all summarily part of a special exception.
Demonstration of Wirecast.
Okay. I have a question that came up within here. Will you be renting boats? Do you rent boats there now?
We rent kayaks, canoes, and paddle boats. We do not rent speedboats.
No motorized.
No motorized boats.
And you intend to stay that way?
Correct.
Of Wirecast.
These are your sites and correct?
Yeah, that one is west of the shores in Chesapeake.
Do you have tents for things like these at this property?
No. No, we're not putting that in.
Is it something you might consider in the future?
No, the water playground is intended to take the place of something like that. And this is not a theme park. This is not Disney Light. We're not going to invest $1 billion in this deal and make Disney up here. We're very aware of the sensitivity of the ponds. We work with the ponds people to make sure that we don't impact unduly the pond area. I think everybody gets the sense that this is some massive thing. It will not be, and we'd be prepared to define exactly what it is we want to do if you want to get us to that detail.
Yes, Mr. Does the board have other questions directly at this point, or shall I let Mr. Malia respond?
That's the only thing I want some clarification on, you know, what amenities that you are actually going to have. You know, just some clarification on the expansion, how it will affect. So that's really what I need. And I know we're going to get to that. So.
Okay, Mr. Malia, you said wanted to say a few things.
So some folks have asked you to sort of back up from the 5 special exception criteria and decide that we haven't even appropriately filed the correct application, that we should have filed for a variance, that we're a hotel or an inn, that this is not an actual expansion of a campground, which is appropriate for an application for a special exception. And I would suggest to you that, in my opinion, it's a red herring. It's an argument meant to distract you from the 5 issues, the 5 special exception criteria. Mr. Nadeau read the definition of camping ground. I think what is there clearly meets the definition in your zoning ordinance of a camping ground. In 2012, the planning board approved a site plan for the campground together with the additional building that the then owners wanted to put on the property. Your town has acknowledged it as a campground. It's been a campground since 1970. The application has appropriately been filed as an application for special exception for a campground expansion. Campgrounds are allowed in this zone by special exception. So the argument that we aren't a campground, that we're a hotel or an inn, or we need a variance is simply incorrect and meant to distract you from the 5 special exception criteria. A lot of allegations that the application is too vague. Keep in mind that this is a zoning board review of a special exception application, and as I think I've said at a prior meeting or two, if we get approval from the zoning board, what we then have to do is go to the Milton Planning Board for site plan review approval. It's at the site plan review level that the requirements, if you look at the town's site plan review regulations, become much, much more specific. It's at that level that we were planning on providing your planning board with all of the information, the details that this audience is looking for on, excuse me, lighting and the amenities and everything else. Because that's just the way it's typically done. We provide you with kind of a general overview of what we intend to do as far as the special exception application is concerned. Then when we go to the planning board, we fill in all of the details, and the planning board would thoroughly scrutinize those, and all of these folks, of course, would have an opportunity to participate. Having said all that, if you are of the opinion that you feel like you can't make a decision on the 5 special exception criteria unless you had more information on what we were proposing, what we are proposing, or would like to propose for amenities, then we're probably not going to finish tonight anyways. We would agree to work up a more specific amenities plan for you if you feel like you need that information. If you feel like you either can't rely on your planning board, don't want to rely on your planning board, or feel like you need that information to make an informed decision on the 5 special exception criteria. We just didn't think we needed to put together that much information at this early stage, because if we don't get approval from you, then we don't go to the planning board, so we don't do all that work to fill in all of the details. But if you need it for the amenities, we'll get it to you prior to the next meeting. There have been a number of allegations from the audience tonight that certain things that are happening on site now are violations of your ordinance. We would strongly disagree with those allegations. I've worked with Mr. Brossenbrook and Zachary, his son, and Chelsea, his daughter, in Ossipee, and if there's an issue with the town, they're on the phone that day. If your CEO has an issue, then he will let us know and it will be addressed. But we haven't heard from your CEO regarding any alleged zoning violations happening on the property. That's another red herring, not relevant to the decision you have to make tonight. But your CEO knows where to find us if he needs us. I've already addressed the fact that the current proposal is not for 124 sites, it's for 95 sites. That's, again, as your attorney, I think, agreed, it's not a change to the application. It could be a condition of approval if we do get special exception approval, that the 29 additional sites shown on the plan are not being approved as part of this approval. If the applicant/property owner ever intends to develop those 29 sites, they will have to come back to the ZBA and the planning board. You know, you can put conditions of approval regarding the opening date and the closing date. These are all issues that you can impose as conditions of approval, and I'm sure your attorney would help you write up the notice of decision that would contain all these things. Some of the comments related to other special exception criteria. In fact, your new board member doesn't have a name tag, so I'm not sure.
Chris. Oh, he did.
Chris.
Oh, it got moved.
Oh, he's over there. Okay.
He moved.
Talk about the master plan.
I didn't.
The master plan is addressed in criteria number 5 of your site plan approval. That's where you have to find that the proposal meets the master plan. So I guess your concerns about the master plan can be addressed in criteria number 5. That's not a reason to find that we haven't appropriately filed an application for a special exception to expand a campground. But it is something for you to consider in criteria number 5. Regarding Mr. Turgeon's comments regarding the lake, George has already addressed this. The campground has joined the New Hampshire Lakes Association. As George said, there are 2 employees signed up to take the June 9th boat training course, Ben and Corey. That's a 3-hour training course, and so these aren't just, you know, summer kids, high school kids that are, well, maybe they're in high school, I don't know that, but they're going to be trained, college. So they are, they're going to be trained. They're going to go through the 3-hour course. The boats will have to be washed and inspected, and after inspection, if they pass, they'll receive a sticker indicating they're good to launch. Again, that can be another detail if you want it in your conditions of approval that could go in the conditions of approval. More specificity regarding the boat washing program, and I think that came about after a meeting that Chelsea had with Mr. Turgeon not too long ago. So we, you know, took his advice. We're trying to take as much feedback as we can and respond to it as best we can. I've addressed the fact that we'll get more specific when we get to the site plan level. Mr. Harlow spoke again from Lebanon. I think it's somewhat hypocritical for the town of Lebanon to be complaining about this campground when they have Flat Rock Bridge and campground in Lebanon, which has 350 sites on 79 acres, together with a water park and lots of other amenities. They don't have a zoning ordinance in Lebanon, I believe. So I think it's somewhat hypocritical for a town official from Lebanon without a zoning ordinance and with a significant campground with a water park and lots of other amenities to be strongly urging the town of Milton to make sure you limit this campground. May I have a copy?
I'm gonna ask the public not to comment at this juncture.
So that's on a river. That's Flat Rock Ridge Campground. I think it's about 7 miles from Mighty Joe.
A point of order, Mr. Chairperson?
Yes, sir. Wait, hold on, I have a point of order.
If you close the public hearing
Yes.
and then allow the applicant to put in new information and new evidence, you have to open the public hearing so other people can respond to it or at least say what the response is. Now you've closed the hearing and nobody can respond to all the stuff he's throwing at you.
At this moment, I would argue that he's responding to the information that you folks provided.
That is not a response.
That is a
That's new
response
evidence.
to the continued presence of Mr. Harlow from Lebanon.
Mr. Mitchell, do you have an opinion on that?
I think it is within the bounds of a response.
To what?
Are you saying I should let the public speak, or that I've closed that and this is appropriate?
I agree with what you just voiced, that what he's trying to do is respond to each of the comments that the abutters made.
And do I have an obligation to let them then counterpoint yet again?
It would go all night.
Exactly. But, so from a legal perspective, I am not out of order, correct?
Correct. If he was going into another topic, that's something different. But this is within the scope of responding to what the gentleman from Maine said.
Okay, thank you.
But I would just make the comment that in describing the limitations that the selectmen of Lebanon face in the view of non-zoning that Lebanon may have, you need to be careful to avoid the ad hominem argument. That's it?
Okay.
A couple more things. I think it was Mrs. King that suggested, I believe, that a special exception was a request to use land in a manner which was not permitted by the zoning ordinance, and that's not actually true. A special exception is a use of land which is permitted by the zoning ordinance as long as certain criteria set forth in the ordinance can be met. If those criteria can be met, the special exception must be granted, as distinguished from a variance, which is when somebody asks to make a use of land which is not permitted by the ordinance, and that's why the variance test is much different and much more difficult to meet, because when you're asking for a variance, you're asking for use of land that's not permitted by your ordinance. In this case, we're asking for a special exception which is permitted by the ordinance as long as the special exception criteria can be met. Keep in mind that we're dealing with criteria number one, that is, we got off track with a lot of information that might not relate to criteria number one, that the site is an appropriate location for the proposed use. I think there is little doubt that this site is an appropriate location for the proposed use. Think what you want about the other four criteria, but this is, I would say, a no-brainer. The site is and has been used as a campground since 1970. The proposed use is a campground. We're not asking for a change of use. We're asking to continue and expand the same use of the property that has been made since 1970. So, and it's been affirmed by your planning board in 2012 as an appropriate use of a campground, as an appropriate use of this property by site plan approval. It's clearly an appropriate use of this particular property. It was unanimously found to be an appropriate use of this particular property back in September. And in April, you found that it was an appropriate use of this property by a vote of 4-1 with Mr. Brown in the minority. So, did you have anything to add, George? James?
Well, no.
That's all I have for right now.
Thank you. I think where some of these pieces, from my perspective today, when I'm hearing some of this and I'm seeing more pieces and I'm hearing quotes of I believe your son as to the goals of your organization and competing with Disney and creating all these different places, and that this is the model you like to take and plant and grow. That's new information to me. I think it goes to for me, it might be going to the definition. As might have been stated, it's up to us to interpret based on the time what was the intent when they came up with those definitions. And I would suggest that when the zoning went in, I kind of think that when the voters decided on a campground, I don't think they were talking about some of this stuff. I don't think that they're thinking, at least that's the perspective I'm kind of leaning to today, that I really had given no consideration before. I know we talked before, and I had said, well, to me, camping was a tent, and it was a camper, and that was camping. And you said, well, you haven't been camping in a long time, because a lot of these have those pieces. But when these definitions went in, and I guess I'm just asking the board to consider this, and I don't know that I've made up my mind yet. I'm looking for some of that input and guidance. When the voters voted on definition of a campground, did they have in mind the possibility of water slides and I think when it comes to the renting of I mean, a lot of the things you're describing as amenities have definitions in here, which are not allowed within that low-density zone. Cafe and eating, sit-down eating establishments. That's not allowed in low density. But if you call it a campground, does that change that? So that's, I guess, I'm looking for, what are your thoughts on that? What are the board members' thoughts on that?
Well, can I ask a question? What amenities are at the park now?
Amenities meaning what's,
Snack bar, anything?
No.
Nothing?
Ice cream parlor?
Not yet.
Well, I mean, having been at the park, is softball field an amenity?
Well, I don't know what you
Is a horseshoe pit an amenity?
Well,
Is a basketball court an amenity?
soccer field. My chess game, my hibachi, I mean, we can go on and on and on. So I guess, yeah.
But I don't think the question, I'm not sure if you're going there, I'm not going there saying they can't have amenities. I'm asking, are these amenities that are potentially being proposed allowed? I don't think we have anything in our zoning saying
Are they in
can't
keeping
have.
with the definition of campground?
That's my question.
The
Is
use
this a
window.
campground? If those amenities, these new proposed amenities are there. Yes, sir, you want to respond to that?
A couple of points. My son says we're in competition with Disney. We are. We provide an experience. They provide an experience. You go to Orlando, you get to do all that, or you can come and have a family-friendly camping experience. We're in competition. We're in competition with Las Vegas. We're in competition with all sorts of experiences. It doesn't mean that I'm going to create Las Vegas here or Disney here. It means I have a different experience, which I think is a better experience and a more family-friendly experience. But it's a different experience, but yet we compete. In terms of what is a campground, for years people put swimming pools at campgrounds. 4 feet, 5 feet deep pools, diving boards. We don't do that. Kids drown, you need lifeguards. We like an interactive playground splash pad type of an experience because that's what families want. They don't want to have worried that their kid's going to drown, so we don't do that. Years ago, you had horseshoes. You know what? I don't do horseshoes. I don't know if anybody does horseshoes anymore. What do? They do laser tag, or they do some other type of activity. That
Folks,
like
please.
and it's still a campground. It's a different experience than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. But we provide an experience that's appropriate to the time in which we live. And that's different than it was 50 years ago. That doesn't turn it from a campground into a Disney World. It's still a campground.
Thank you.
Can I ask your concerns? Would we be wise to take them up on their offer and stop this now and continue with the description of what they're considering, what they want to have for amenities?
Yes, Mr. Brown.
I'm
not ignoring you.
To go with Stan, an undefined amenity has no limit.
I'll agree with that. Yes, sir.
It sounds like you at least need more information on what we plan for the amenities areas, so we would be willing, as Mr. Nato said, to provide that if you want to push this on to your next meeting and get more specific. As I said, we didn't think we had to do that until we got to the planning board level. So we'll do it again.
Thank you. Does the rest of the board feel that same way, or am I alone here?
Well, I have probably a lot more faith in the planning board, but I don't think it's bad to have it. I think a lot of the people in this room would like to hear it. So when we have an offer from the applicant to do this, I think we should take them up on it.
Okay. Is there a motion? What would that
Well,
motion be?
To be honest with you, I'm seeing both sides. The amenities, I would be considering them when I look at question 2, question 3, 4, and 5. So, but I would agree with the comment that unless we specifically state what we want or don't want within any approval, it's all will be, as somebody else said, Mr. Attorney Bolt, I think, because we had to deal with this before when I was on the ZBA. If there isn't sufficient specificity with respect to any approval, it can be interpreted very loosely. You know, to me, old school. When the zoning was put in, camping was sleeping on the ground, burning copious amounts of wood, and processing Budweiser. Not necessarily in those orders. I understand it's changing. The definition, the experience, what people want out of camping. But maybe this can be a campground where we actually camp, and if anybody wants to do other things, they can go to Jellystone or Wally World. I don't know. So that's why I'm kind of, in taking all this in, a little bit overwhelmed, because I just thought I was talking about camping.
Yeah, I didn't tell you.
Processing Budweiser.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have you.
No, it's like I don't like horseshoes either. I thought lawn darts was a perfectly deadly thing to do, you know, and I don't know why they outlawed it. It was the legal profession must have loved it. It was a fine thing to do.
Come over, I still have my set.
You do? Oh, good.
I will make the motion to adjourn to a specific date so they can supply the list of amenities that they're requesting.
Can we go further and say that you'll give some specificity to what that actually means, a water feature versus it's going to be 40 feet high and 300 feet long, and it's going to use 1,200 gallons of water a second? Okay.
I will.
Yes. Hold on 1 second. I think we're getting a little clear.
Okay. We can get pretty specific. We've done this in a number of places, and we can do them bigger, smaller, whatever.
Okay.
Obviously, it needs to be a certain size for us to have the experience we want. But we've done this enough that we can get pretty damn specific here with you if you want.
Okay.
We just didn't think that was the time to do it. We can do it.
Okay. Thank you. Hold on a moment, please. Yes, Larry.
Yes. I wanted to, I think we should have this discussion. There's a motion on the floor. It hasn't been seconded. For procedural purposes, I will second the motion and then provide my own discussion, which is you will bear with me for one quick minute for the campground down in Ulster County, which is 10 miles south of New Paltz, where in 1894 one Solomon Deo gave a 9-foot obelisk to the great village of New Paltz with the stipulation that his name be placed on it. And so they did. If you go down 4 feet into the ground, his name is on the bottom. The large print giveth, the small print taketh away. I want to know what amenities you will not be introducing and the maximum scope of those that will be offered on site. And those are the qualities that define amenity.
Okay, I think that's a good description and definition of what I'd probably be looking for too. Well, it won't be.
It was in Chinese, but
finish your thought.
But I like the thought of, okay, here are the dimensions of what we're looking at. and here's what we are not proposing. And I would think when you are not proposing that, that's not going to suddenly appear on its own, 3 years from now, without at least going towards further approval.
But if they give us a list of what they're proposing, nothing else can be under the special exemption, because it'd be part of the stipulations.
Providing it's not vague. And you had something you wanted to say?
I just had a point of clarification before you vote.
Yes.
Is my understanding correct that if this motion is passed, and it still seems to be within criteria 1,
Yep.
that the board's intent would be to reopen the public hearing, even in criteria 1, for this limited purpose, and to get that information and neighbors' response?
Questions? I think that would be absolutely appropriate because there's enough new information being presented. Thank you for that piece. Okay. So,
Point of order.
Yes.
Do we have any opportunity to comment on that before you vote?
what are your thoughts?
It's a procedural vote.
Wait, stop. So
you can allow it, or you can say it's not necessary.
Okay. I'll take.
Can't do it when
I don't want. I don't.
Yeah, that's it.
Can I take it with a motion on the table?
That's a valid point.
I just wanted to make one point.
It doesn't matter.
Can I take it with a motion on the table? Legally. You seem to be doubting
I'm
that,
hesitating
so.
because I don't think there's any black and white rule, but I think it's a logical point to make.
That we should not.
Yes.
Okay. So the answer to that is going to be no at this point for legal purposes and to protect the integrity of this discussion and any decision that comes down the line.
How far out are you thinking of, I mean, there's a motion to postpone, but
We usually
how
would
far
go out a
are you
month
thinking?
to the 4th.
Be June 28th.
Is that an adequate amount of time for the applicant to prepare this specificity? They're nodding yes. Was that somewhere where you were going?
What?
Was that somewhere where you were going? Somewhat where you were going?
I mean,
Just yay or nay?
Am I allowed to
No. Well, just yay or nay. Okay. I was hoping that it might answer your question, because it's my question. But I just, if we're going to make a motion like that, I think I need to know. People need to know what the time and date is. The other
Sure.
thing
No,
is-
we would go
We
date
can't live with-
specific.
We can't do it without that.
Correct, because then the other thing is, if you did it without a date, then they're entitled to a re-notification.
Correct. No, we'll go date specific on the
Dana
decision.
eyes just popped out.
Would you say June 28th?
Lot of notices. I believe so, yes, June 28th.
All right, so I'll add that to my motion.
So actually, I have a quick question. Do we have anything slated on there already?
No, I have not received any other applications.
Some interest, though.
Nothing's been submitted yet.
There's a motion on the table. Was that motion clear? Do we know what that motion is?
Just to
Require, it's a motion, as I understand it, it is a motion to require the scope and number of amenities planned, and that those proposed are final.
Right, full description.
Full description.
Okay.
Is that how you understand it, Dana? Because you're going to make the minutes, okay? No,
okay.
On June 28th, 6 o'clock, same place.
That was the days we met once, twice a year.
Yeah, I know. Okay. So we have a motion on the table. Board needs to vote on that. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Is that a point of order?
Yes. When will that list be provided, both to the board and to us?
Your decision, not hers.
But it's fair to ask them a reasonable time frame on that they say a day before. I think that's unreasonable.
About 7 days prior.
You good with that?
Thank you much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
And that's to Dana, 7 days prior. Correct?
And
we'll be on the website.
Yeah, to the town.
We'll be on the website then.
I will make my best effort as long as I'm here, and it's before 4 o'clock.
Okay. So.
Are you going someplace?
Never know.
Can I
Could
take
have a
his question now?
vacation.
He's very persistent.
No, because we closed the meeting.
We did not close the
We
meeting.
did.
No, we did
The
not.
motion was to postpone this meeting.
That's correct.
Yeah, he's right.
Take this question.
What's the question,
Are there
sir?
any other business?
Whether we answer is still up in the air.
My understanding is that if there are 3 of these 5 criteria that you vote against, then it's, they lose. Is that right?
No, I'm going to give some, I will give more clarity. See, we deal with this on a regular basis, so here's how that works. Each of these criteria, we take a straw vote on each.
Right.
That gives an indication of where this board is leaning. None of those are binding. If we voted 4-1 against on 3 of those things, it does not necessarily mean that it has failed already.
Okay.
We take one final vote on the entire project. Now, I personally would think logistically that if 3 of those failed by a majority of people, that those people wouldn't then be voting in favor, but I can't guarantee that that's how that happens, because those are straw votes.
Okay. To me, there was a compelling reason to decline this based upon the effect on the lake.
Yeah, now we're getting further than we can go right now.
The last thing I will say is that most of us that live this here tonight are summer residents. We have to drive 4 or 5 hours to come to these meetings. You've had 7 meetings so far.
This might be 8.
Time allow our friends here to redo an application, redo information.
That's incorrect.
I would
We're not gonna-
hope that next time you could come to.
That's incorrect
I would,
information.
I personally would also like to come to a conclusion. I keep having deja vu every time I look out here. But at the same time, we have to ensure that we do our due diligence, and that, one, all you folks get to speak within the structure that we need to have defined, and that these folks get a fair hearing for us to hear all that stuff, and that we can make an appropriate deliberation to make the best decision we can make doing our due diligence. And I can't put a time limit on that necessarily, and not suddenly leave it wide open for them to say, we didn't get a fair hearing. Or for you to say, nope, you didn't give us a fair chance, you just ran it through.
We postponed it twice ourselves.
Yeah, we have.
Regional impact and then.
But I'm not going to, I'm not going to get into a debate on that piece. Mr. Gallagher, you had a point?
That's all I was going to say.
Okay. Thank you. Any other things? Good, that's closed. Thank you. So, there's a motion? That motion was approved. Did we approve minutes? We approved minutes. Is there any other business before this board that is not related to that project?
Did you guys adjourn already?
No, we have not. We're about to do that.
Motion to postpone this meeting. This case.
Mr. Nato.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Hold on, wait. Okay. You can, if it's
voted.
procedural, you can ask me after the fact. If it's about this case specifically, you'll have to bring it up at the next meeting. Because we had that whole time to bring those things up.
Where are you all going? You
I'm
did
sorry?
not motion to adjourn.
Yeah, there's no motion to adjourn.
Did Larry? I cannot hear you.
Well, I didn't take a vote. No. Where's Larry? You can't.
Larry, come
Where is
back,
Larry? Larry! Sir, we are still in. Larry.
Larry.
All in favor of adjournment, vote aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.